Hey everyone, and welcome to your Java tutorial on getters and setters. Okay, so we have our person class pulled up here from our last few tutorials, right? Inside of our person class, we have a public first name, we have a private age, and we have a constructor that sets the first name and the age. But after our constructor sets our first name and our age, we can't access age anymore. So what we need is some way to keep age private, right? We don't want to access, or we don't want people to know our age necessarily, but we want to be able to expose it on our terms, right? We want to keep it private, but be able to provide it under certain circumstances, and we want to be able to set it and to write to it under certain circumstances. We want to be able to both read and write. So I'm going to delete this constructor definition here, and I'm going to put in the term getter, and we're going to say a getter is a method that allows external code to read member variable data, right? So remember here, our age is a member variable. So a getter is a method that allows external code to read member variable data. And there's a pretty common naming convention around getters, and I'll show you that now. So remember, a getter is going to provide something, right? So a getter is public, and it has a return type of integer age because we're going to be giving them this value. And the naming convention here is get, and then the variable name that you're getting. So in this case, it's age. So get age is the naming convention here. And what we're going to do is simply return age. And so this return keyword is, as we know from our function instructionals, it basically is it returns or gives out whatever comes after it, which in this case is age. So all this instruction is doing is providing age to the outside world. And so we can test this out by doing system out.println, and we can do p.getAge. And so we can also do a tom.getAge. We're going to put that in the print line as well. So we'll do system.out.println tom.getAge. Cool. So let's run this real quick. We see Peter 34 and Thomas 28. Awesome. So now you might be wondering, well, why don't I just make this public if we're just going to give it out willy-nilly? Well, it's because you want to define the terms that your variable is accessed, right? So that's why they're called accessors, because it's how you access your data. So this is going to be maybe a little bit more clear when we talk about setters. So I'm going to define that for you now. So a setter is a method that allows external code to write to member variable data. And it also has a very specific sort of syntax that I can show you now. So we're going to go down to our getAge method, and below it, we'll create a public method. And a setter doesn't provide anything, right? It doesn't return a variable. It allows you to set something. So it takes in a parameter. So we're going to have a void return type. And the naming convention around this is the same as a getter. So it's set age, right? So a setter, the naming convention is, a getter is get and then the member variable name. A setter is set and the member variable name. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take in a parameter. We'll call it age input. So now what you might be thinking is, well, if you're just going to do age equals age input, then what's the point of having a getter and setter? That's a legitimate point. But in this situation, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that our member variable is not set to anything negative, right? Because we don't have the ability to have a negative age, right? So we're going to make sure in this method that we don't set our data to a negative value, which gives us control over our private data that we would not have if we made it public. All right, so to do that, we are going to create an if statement, and we're going to say if age input is greater than 0, right? So we really don't want age to be 0 either. So we're just going to say if it's greater than 0. So it's never a negative and then also not 0. Then we'll say age, which is our member variable up here. Remember, it's private, is equal to age input. Right, so there you have it. Now, if we have our getter here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to over here do a repeat set age, and I'm going to set my age back to 28, a beautiful year. But then I'm going to go to Tom, and I'm going to set Tom's age to -3. Right, so let's clear our terminal here and let's run our program and see what happens. I started out at 34 and I want to set it to 28. Tom is starting out at 28 and he wants to set it to -3. So let's run it. And you can see in our output, we both have the age of 28. And that's because we're controlling the access to this private member variable, right? So that's really powerful because through that you can sort of determine and restrict the values that go into our data. And having that control is super, super important when you're working with objects, especially when you're working with data that, most data in the real world has some level of a restriction around it, right? So you're able to enforce that restriction through setters. And then you're also able to enforce certain restrictions with getters as well. I can get into that more when we talk about, composition and things like that. But for now, just know that through getters and setters, you have the power to control who accesses your data and in what way, which is super important when you're working with objects and object-oriented programming. Anyway, thanks for watching this, and I hope you learned something.